Well, hello, and welcome to an experimental project that I'm going to try to put forth, which is an idea I had actually a while ago about comics in general, where you could have the creator talk about the comic itself. So, since I've only ever created one comic, here's me going to attempt to do that. This comic is one that I made at least 7, 8 years ago, maybe, is when I started this up, and this entire thing was started because I was trying to convince a friend of mine that he had artistic talent enough to make a web comic, a web series. At the time, we were reading Penny Arcade, PvP were the popular ones at the time. User Friendly was another one we were reading, and so I wanted to let him know that he could do this. He had the artistic talent, and I said, "This is how easy it is. Look, I'll make a web comic, and it's that easy." So I drew basically this, what you're looking at right now, and this is the very first comic in a series that I made, and I just called it Intermission because it was all about working in a theater, and the idea behind it was that just random, silly, strange characters, mostly just sort of generic people but with funny personalities, worked in a movie theater, and I was going to use it as an outlet to make fun of movies, not quite in a Mystery Science Theater way, but just in a way that would help to mock movies in general and things that I just found kind of silly and ridiculous. It got away from that, but that was the original intent. So here's the first one here, and this is sort of the introduction of two characters, being Kenny on the right and Mr. Grieber on the left, whose name I couldn't even remember. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember what I named him. Now, this is very, 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 very basic art styling, and I decided that from the very first comic, whether I wanted to do a 4-panel comic or a 3-panel comic, I chose 3 because I'd grown up reading a lot of Garfield comics, and that was the medium I was, well, at least the artistic style I was most comfortable with. So what I tried to do is, instead of drawing exact squares for the first panel and the third panel, and you note there's no square on the middle panel, and that's a very Garfield, Jim Davis style, where he always had a square around the first and third, but not around the middle. So I did that, but I just wanted to have it a little more, vague. So I think I drew 2 empty panels on one 8.5 by 11 and scanned those in, and then I just repeatedly used those 2. And I think I just traced them over and over and over again, so you'll only be able to see maybe pretty much 2 different square types over the entire comic series. So in the very first one, I just wanted to introduce the idea and the main character. The main character on the right being Kenny. I don't know why he has an arrow pointing down on his shirt. I messed around with shirts more often than not. I actually drew lots of different faces, trying to figure out what I could draw on a consistent way, because I'm not a very good artist, so I tried to draw something that I could do consistently. So I just drew face after face after face. I've got an entire page of faces that I really should probably put up later, but I won't yet. And those faces were just me trying to find out if I could do something more than once. So these were the faces, actually Kenny's face there that you see in the first and third panel is the one that I chose, and that is the main face that I use, that sort of head shape, which is sort of a tall rectangle, and, well, maybe about a third of it covered with hair. Little triangular ears seem to be the staple as well. Mr. Grieber, however, I wanted to go with, he's the main antagonist, so he needed to be something sort of strange. So he pretty much looks like, what was the guy's name? Was it Professor Peabody from Astro Boy, but just with a smaller nose? Because he's got that. His hair is indicative of drawing a puffy cloud, and you just draw a slightly longer puffy cloud for the side views. And then, if you notice in the change from the first panel over to the third panel, he's missing his ear. There's lots of other changes. For example, the fact that he sits at a perfectly rectangular desk with nothing on it. There's no decals, so he's apparently rather Spartan. It could be a cardboard box for all you know. And the chair itself, the only difference is it's got a little gap in the back, so it's got kind of a 2-dimensional frame to the back of it. And Kenny, of course, is directly associated with myself. Kenny is me. That's who's in there. That being my first name that I never use, I just thought it would be the easiest way to put myself into the comic, which is what most cartoonists do. They put a version of themselves within the comic. So I just wanted to use mostly the name. His personality is, well, maybe a little bit like mine, but for the most part, the main parallels between this character and myself in reality was just the people that he bumped into, the friends he made. Every time I made a new friend, or would a lot of different things would happen in my life, it would happen to Kenny in this comic. So even though I wasn't trying to do more than just show a friend of mine that it's easy to make a webcomic, this turned into kind of an online pictorial diary in a weird way. You really had to read between the lines. The character Mr. Grieber, the boss, though, he was based on just lots of different, every boss I've ever had, kind of, or just he was the stereotypical bad boss, the mean boss, the one that you couldn't talk to. So that was basically how that started, and I think things continued from there on. But if you just look, this is a very solid line style. It was drawn very darkly, and every one of these, I hand drew them, and then scanned them in. I didn't do anything post-production to them, because as you can see, me adding the text, that was text added in Photoshop, but for some reason I was really bad with anti-aliasing. So they're very pixelated, and I hadn't quite figured that out for quite a number of comics, so the text looked absolutely horrible. So the only things I did after scanning them in was put in the text, and then draw little lines pointing to who it was talking to. Most of the time I forgot. So I guess that's kind of the introduction and this comic itself. So I'll try to have some sort of dialogue for each comic as I go along. This is an idea that I actually pitched to Gary Larson, the cartoonist behind The Far Side. I happened upon accidentally talking to him on the phone one day, long story, and in talking to him, I mentioned that I had this idea that it would be really good, where directors, you now get a director's commentary on a DVD over top of a movie, and I thought, why not do that with still life art as opposed to just moving picture art? So over top of a series of slides, is you get a director's commentary over top of some sort of artistic renditions of some of the costumes that they use, and you get that sometimes in the DVD, but you never ever get anyone who is a cartoonist going over their cartoons and talking over top of them. So this is kind of a pilot project in doing that, even though it's A, not a very good comic, and B, me, and I'm not famous. So we'll just try that out and basically see how he goes. So we'll move on to comic number 2.